Johnny Carson, the undisputed king of late night, a man who ruled American television for 3 decades with charm, wit, and a piercing ability to read his guests and his audience, was the picture of effortless confidence every night he walked through that curtain on The Tonight Show. Yet behind the laughter, behind the smooth monologues, behind the carefully polished image of the man America thought it knew, Johnny carried a lifetime of regrets that haunted him until his very last breath. And now, decades after his final bow, devastating details about the 10 biggest regrets of his life have finally surfaced, revealing a darker, more human side to the legend who always kept his true self hidden behind a wall of humor. And these regrets, spanning love, family, fame, and choices that shaped his destiny, paint a portrait not of the untouchable icon but of a man who lived with pain, mistakes, and remorse that no standing ovation could erase. And the first regret, perhaps the deepest, was his inability to keep a family together. For despite marrying 4 times, Carson's relationships ended in betrayal, bitterness, and heartbreak, with his marriages collapsing under the weight of infidelity, work obsession, and a cold distance that left his wives devastated and left Johnny himself alone in sprawling mansions with no one to share the silence. And it was this silence that fed into his second regret, his failure as a father. For while America saw him as the wise, funny, comforting presence every night, his own sons often saw little of him at all, growing up in the shadow of his fame, yearning for affection that never came. And though Johnny provided financially, emotionally he was absent. And when tragedy struck, like the heartbreaking death of his son Richard in a car accident, Carson was crushed by guilt, privately admitting to close friends that he had never been the father he should have been, a wound that never healed. And this ties directly to his third regret, his addiction to alcohol and the destructive temper it unleashed. For behind closed doors Carson could be cruel, sharp-tongued, and even violent, lashing out at friends, lovers, and colleagues when the drinks took hold, a darkness that haunted him as he aged and one that he often tried to mask with humor on air. But those who knew him best saw the toll it took, and his fourth regret was tied to this darkness. The way he treated those closest to him, particularly women, with many accounts describing him as dismissive, unfaithful, and at times emotionally abusive, behaviors that Carson himself reportedly acknowledged in his later years as shameful. And while he publicly maintained an air of control, privately he admitted to friends that he had pushed away people who truly cared about him, leaving a trail of broken relationships. And then there was his fifth regret, never truly reconciling with his mother Ruth, a cold, emotionally distant woman whom Carson both loved and despised, famously saying she never once told him she loved him or that she was proud of him. And though he built his entire life seeking the approval of millions, he could never get the validation he craved most, from her. And in interviews with Confidants, Carson admitted that this unhealed wound fueled his relentless drive, his perfectionism, and his self-destructive behaviors. But it also haunted him, an ache he carried into old age. And his sixth regret was his inability to walk away sooner from The Tonight Show. For while his reign was legendary, Carson confided to friends that he felt trapped by fame, yearning for freedom and privacy yet afraid of what life without the show would mean. And when he finally did retire, he struggled deeply with the silence, the lack of audience, the end of the applause, and admitted in private letters that he sometimes wished he had left earlier, to truly live rather than to simply exist for a television audience. And his seventh regret was his complicated relationship with money and fame. For while he amassed a fortune, he was notoriously stingy, often clashing with staff and even friends over expenses. And though he lived in luxury, he admitted near the end of his life that wealth could not heal loneliness, that fame could not mend broken relationships, and that in chasing both, he had lost pieces of himself. And his eighth regret was never mentoring or guiding the next generation of late-night hosts in a more meaningful way. For while he publicly supported successors like Jay Leno, Privately he was bitter, feeling overshadowed, and at the same time guilty for not giving them the wisdom he could have passed on, leaving him torn between pride in his legacy and fear of being forgotten. And his ninth regret was the absence of true intimacy in his life, for though millions adored him, Carson often admitted he had no real friends, only acquaintances, and that he had built walls so high around himself that no one could truly know the man behind the desk. And in his later years, when illness and age forced him into solitude, this regret consumed him, for all the fame and fortune in the world could not replace the warmth of genuine companionship. And finally, his 10th and perhaps most haunting regret was not living more authentically, for Carson spent his entire career playing a role, hiding his pain, masking his anger, suppressing his demons, and presenting to the world a polished, witty persona while the real Johnny remained a mystery, even to himself. And on his deathbed, as those close to him have revealed, he expressed sorrow that he had spent so much time seeking applause and so little time seeking peace, a confession that strips away the myth and reveals the man in full, brilliant, flawed, haunted, and human. And as we look back now, decades after his passing, these 10 regrets stand as a devastating reminder that even the most iconic legends carry burdens we never see, that behind the laughter there is pain, behind the spotlight there is darkness, and that Johnny Carson, the man who made America laugh for 30 years, left this world not with the booming applause of a studio audience but with the quiet ache of what could have been. And this is Hollywood Vault 8 AM, where we uncover the devastating truths, the hidden stories, and the final confessions of the icons you thought you knew.